Tonight, two big check marks. One has already happened, and we're expecting the other any minute now. And when it does, you can officially lock in your matchup cards for what might be the most important election of our lifetime. Welcome to a special edition of Newsnight. I'm Abby Phillip in New York.
And I'm Laura Coates in Washington, D.C. Just a short time ago, Joe Biden made official, well, the obvious, that he will be the Democratic nominee come this November. He is celebrating clinching in a new video, asking voters, are you ready to win? Well, tonight, Biden adding important victories to his win column. Look at all these states. The state of Georgia, one that he won in 2020, put him over the top. It's also a state where Donald Trump tried to deny democracy, a state where Donald Trump is on trial for election interference. And tonight, the president put the November choice in quite the stark terms. Are we going to stand up and defend our democracy or let others tear it down?
So who are the others he's talking about? Well, it's pretty obvious, one person. It's Donald Trump, who sits only a handful of delegates away now from locking up the nomination after romping over every single Republican challenger that stood in his way. Now tonight, Trump has already put Georgia and Mississippi in the win column, and soon after polls close in Washington state, he will all but certainly put an exclamation point on this primary and confirm to the country that the Republican Party has all been remade in his image.
So let's begin with our coverage tonight, the place that matters most on nights just like tonight, at the Magic Wall with CNN chief correspondent John King. John, we know that he has two more in his win column. You're talking about Donald Trump, Mississippi, and also Georgia. How's it looking?
Well, he needs 31 more delegates. Joe Biden, as you noted, clinched with Georgia. He is now the presumptive nominee. You're not officially the nominee till you get to the convention. They do the gavel, they drop the confetti, but he's the presumptive nominee. Donald Trump will get there when Washington state comes in later tonight. The polls close there in about an hour. This is where he is, 1184 right now. You need 1215. So 31 more delegates. This is impressive. He's winning 92% of the delegates in all the contests so far. So if you're in the Trump campaign, you're saying, wow, we're winning 92%. It's the middle of March, March 12th. You're going to clinch the nomination. That's great, right? And look at this. Only Vermont for Nikki Haley. But even as you see, and it's the same for Biden, even as you see great strength in the primary campaign, if you look deeper, you do find some weaknesses, and we're seeing them in Georgia tonight.
Let's go to Georgia because, of course, this was a very controversial discussion point. Remember that 12,000 less than that votes in terms of winning. How did he fare? So
public opinion polling right now shows Donald Trump ahead in Georgia about a month ago, a very reliable poll. Shows him ahead right now. But, as you know, there's an election interference trial there. And forget all that for a second. Just remember how close this was, 11,000 votes last time. Look, he's getting 84%. So again, if you're a Republican, you're a Trump fan, you say 84%, that's great. It is great. However, she dropped out of the race, remember, number one, for starters. She's getting Nikki Haley, the former governor, former ambassador, getting 14% if you round that up. But Laura, look more closely. Fulton County in Atlanta, wow. She's getting 39%. Now, this is a Democratic area. Fulton County is going to be blue when we're at this map and election. But you got to, if you're Trump, you got to cut into the margins, right? You can't let Joe Biden get 70%. You can't let him get 75%. How do you stop that from happening? You get independents and you get moderate Republicans in the suburbs. Moderate Republicans in the suburbs, yet again tonight, as they have throughout the primary season, are saying, no, thank you, Mr. Trump, even though she's out of the race. That's Fulton. Come over here, Gwinnett. She's getting 23% right there. Again, Atlanta, this used to be a very Republican suburb. These suburbs are becoming more and more Democratic, in part because suburban voters are repulsed by Donald Trump. She's getting 23%. Come down here to DeKalb. Look at that. Look at that. That's 45% for a candidate who's gone from the race against the former president of the United States in a state with a Republican governor. But remember the difference. Brian Kemp fought Donald Trump when Donald Trump said the election was stolen. Brian Kemp said, no, it was not. We run free and fair elections here in the state of Georgia. You do have, this is a Trump state, I don't want to overdo it, he's getting 84% of the vote, but there are a lot of traditional establishment suburban Republicans who believe their governor, not Donald Trump. And tonight, a lot of them are saying no thank you in voting for Nikki Haley, especially here. It's stunning to me. If you look at it in this context, come back to the 2020 map, look at the presidential race. This is why. Right, Atlanta, Fulton County, and the suburbs around it. Look how close that was, 11,779 votes. And so this is the major population center, Atlanta and the big suburbs around it. No issue with any of these communities. They're great communities too, but the people live here, right? If you're looking at the math of a big election. And so if you look at DeKalb, yes, Donald Trump only got 16% last time, right? If he can get 20% there, that's the 11,000 votes we're talking about, right? That's the 11,000 votes. So you come back to tonight and you just look at this. And so where he was weak in 2020, he's showing some weak in the general election. He's showing some weakness tonight. So it's a big win. But again, it's the suburbs. It's not like a broken record. But suburban voters still have huge doubts about Donald Trump. He's going to be the Republican nominee. He'll be the presumptive nominee in about an hour when he wins Washington. Between now and his convention, and then between then and November, he's got some work to do.
Fulton County, show me one more time. That, of course, where the election subversion trial is. And you're talking about a jury pool as well.
Right.
Interestingly enough.
Look, so you're talking, this is the Republican primary electorate, right? So, 58% if you round up for Trump, 39% for Governor Haley. You're right. There, you think of Atlanta, this is the African-American base in Georgia. Then you move out to the suburbs. It's by far a Democratic area. But there are a lot of Republicans in the close-in suburbs, or at least former Republicans. There are a lot of Brian Kemp voters, if you want to put it that way, in Fulton County in the suburbs. So you come back to 2020 in the presidential election. Again, Donald Trump got 26% in the general election. Joe Biden got 73%. So it's a Democratic area. But so people that some think, oh, it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. If you can make that 28%, then you win Georgia. If you lose by 10,000 votes, it's all about the margins. Can you move that up? And so if you're Trump coming in from the last campaign to this campaign, you're saying, I know my problems are right here. Right here. You got to make them better. In the prime results tonight, you see a big question mark of whether he indeed has.
John King making us do math tonight. We'll be checking back in, though. Abby?
Laura, thank you. Joining me now is Democratic Congresswoman from Minnesota, Ilhan Omar. She's a member of the Progressive Caucus in the House, and she very vocally opposes Israel's war in Gaza. Congresswoman, thank you for being here with us tonight.
Thank you for having me, Abby.
So President Biden just a couple hours ago crossed that delegate threshold to cinch the nomination for your party. Are you personally comfortable with him as your party's standard bearer in November?
Well, congratulations to the president. And as we've said for a long time, no sitting first-term president has lost the nomination of his party to run for re-election. And I know that every single Democrat in the country is going to make sure that we do everything that we can so that we avoid a Trump presidency.
The State of the Union address was just about a week ago, and it's no secret one of the goals was for President Biden to reset the narrative around his age. Did he do that for you? Did he allay any concerns that you may have had about his age or his ability to do the job?
I was never really concerned with that. I've spent time with the president, both in the White House, traveled back with him to my district, spent time with him in the district. It always seemed very clear to me that he had the energy and the ability to continue to do this work.
One of the things happening on Capitol Hill this week, it's become a big point of contention, a ban on TikTok. You have, this might surprise some people, the same position as Donald Trump when it comes to banning TikTok. Does that feel a little weird to you?
I have the same position as the majority of Americans and TikTok users have. And, today we had an Intel briefing, and none of the information that was provided to us really was persuasive in the fact that there is anything to be really concerned that it's not concerning when it comes to Facebook or Twitter.
So when we just had one of your Democratic colleagues, Congressman Moskowitz, on the show last night, he suggested that, for example, when it comes to the Israel-Hamas war, that China is using TikTok's algorithms to ramp up divisions in this country. And that's one of the concerns that he has in terms of national security. Do you think there's any validity to that?
What I do think that people are finding discomfort is the fact that for the first time in our nation's history, Americans have access to real images of the horrors that are experienced by Palestinians daily. And the onslaught that is taking place, this horrific assault on Gaza, really is being streamed to every single person here in this country. So we no longer have to rely on legacy media to get that information. Every single person has the information directly from the mouths of the people who are being slaughtered.
It's an important point that we are seeing some really horrific images, and we know, based on our own reporting at CNN, that there is a lot of suffering in Gaza. I do want you, as you're talking about this war, to listen to what one of the president's top aides on national security, Jake Sullivan, said today at the White House briefing about a ceasefire, which I know that you support. Listen.
Those who would like to see a ceasefire in Gaza, a ceasefire is on the table today for 6 weeks to be built on into something more enduring if Hamas would simply release women, wounded, and elderly. And the fact that they will not do so says a lot to me about Hamas's regard for innocent Palestinian civilians.
If a ceasefire is on the table today, Hamas could agree to it today. Does he have a point?
Well, Hamas showed up to Egypt, is my understanding, for the negotiations. It was Israel that refused to send negotiators to be at the table to carve out. You have to remember that a ceasefire is not something that happens magically. It is a process that is negotiated by different parties that have interest.
And just to,
and so I
just to be
hope
clear, I mean, I just
Jake
want to make sure I
continues
understand.
to be an honest broker in this conflict.
That's actually, I mean, that's actually what I really want to clarify. Are you suggesting that when he says there's something on the table, a ceasefire that Israel has agreed to, they want those hostages back, Hamas will not agree to that? You don't think that that's where things, you don't believe that that is where things stand today in these negotiations?
Well, there was a current AP reporting that said, negotiators from Hamas arrived in Egypt to negotiate for a ceasefire, and Israel decided not to send anyone down there to negotiate. You can certainly have certain demands that you want, and we obviously want the hostages released, returned to their families. There are American hostages that are included. There is an infant that is included in those hostages. And so it is important that we do everything that we can, but we can't be dishonest to the point where we are saying that everybody is doing everything that they can to be at the table to negotiate a ceasefire that can lead to a permanent solution.
So again, to clarify, Congresswoman, you're saying Jake Sullivan is being dishonest when he says Israel is at the table willing to sign a ceasefire.
I'm saying he's not sharing the full picture. I don't know if he's being honest or not, but it certainly does not go along with the current reporting that has come out of those negotiation efforts.
On the president and this election, which is, as you point out, a really important one, you didn't vote for President Biden or for uncommitted in Minnesota's primary. The uncommitted vote was a big part of that primary in your home state. I wonder, if the election were held today, would you vote for Joe Biden? Can you confirm that he would have your vote today?
Of course, democracy is on the line. We are facing down fascism, and I personally know what my life felt like having Trump as the president of this country, and I know what it felt like for my constituents and for people around this country and around the world. We have to do everything that we can to make sure that does not happen to our country again.
And do you think your constituents ultimately will come to the same conclusion that you did, the tens of thousands who voted uncommitted as a protest against the president?
Well, the uncommitteds have been very clear. They want a change in policy, and we've seen that. Within 3 days, you had the vice president using the word ceasefire. We now have the president saying there is a red line if Israel goes into Rafah, that he is going to condition aid. So there has been a significant progress. I think it is the responsibility of every citizen of this country that cares for the humanity of all to continue to push this administration to do what it can do to end the onslaught that Palestinians are living through every single day.
All right, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, we appreciate you joining us on the show tonight.
Thank you for having me.
And let's talk about these two milestones tonight. With me now, Scott Jennings, Jamal Simmons, S.E. Cupp, and Mark Preston. What did you make of that, Jamal, that interview there on a couple of different fronts? On the political front, honestly, her reaction saying there's been progress, saying that the president has already moved, it seems like that is actually a little bit of an olive branch, more than I've been hearing from many of the progressives who've been supportive of the uncommitted movement.
Well, it's true. The protests and the push on behalf of what's happening in Gaza has moved the president to be more vocal about the policy, I think, that's happening inside the administration. And the administration has always been concerned about the deaths in Gaza. The question is how much they will talk about that publicly. And I think we are hearing them talk more about that and certainly push. I was concerned at one point with Congresswoman Omar's point about the ceasefire, because when we started talking about ceasefire and Hamas was on the line, there was a lot of, she sort of referenced that, well, you know, ceasefire doesn't happen automatically. People have to sort of come to the table. But that's not what you hear when you're at protests, when people say the president should say ceasefire now, and that would sort of end, that would kind of end the thing. So I feel like we have to make sure that everybody's being held to the same standard here, and we need all the parties to have ceasefire, because we do need to have Israel to be secure, and we also need to have these children and women in Gaza to not be dying and for them to be secure. So we've got to figure out how is it that we have a situation where we can end the cycle of violence on the ground in the Middle East and not just point fingers at one party or another.
Scott, were you surprised to hear her say pretty clearly she would support President Biden in November? Some of her colleagues, I'm not sure they would say that today.
No, she's a Democrat. They're going to vote for Biden. I'm not surprised about that. I am surprised that in the year of our Lord, 2024, there is a public relations agent for Hamas sitting in the United States Congress. The reason Israel is not at that meeting is because Hamas will not provide a list of the living hostages. I didn't hear a word of concern for the hostages. You know, ceasefire, she said, don't happen magically. Well, you know, there was a ceasefire in place on October the 6th. And who broke it on October the 7th? I cannot believe, honestly, what I heard out of that interview. What I want are for those hostages to come home. And I want somebody out there to show just a little bit of remorse that Hamas broke the ceasefire, raped and murdered horrifically women, all kinds of people. That's it. How about a little bit of concern for those folks? That's what I'm looking for.
And I just want to be clear, when I said a second ago about not pointing fingers, we all know that Hamas is the one that started this, and Hamas is the one that has to come to the table. The question is now, how do we get to a ceasefire? And that means that all the parties in the region are going to have to be present to make that happen.
Ilhan Omar there took this opportunity and your very important platform to say that Hamas was the good actor here. Hamas was ready for this meeting. And based on some conspiracy theory, our, Jake Sullivan, American representative, is maybe lying about what Israel wants to do and Israel's involvement. Look, I would not go to someone who is a supporter of the BDS movement for their advice on what Israel should do. Or what the U.S. should do when it comes to Israel. She's trafficked in anti-Semitic tropes that seek to strip Israel and the Jewish people of their sovereignty, their identity. I don't trust her opinion on this issue at all. And listen, there are important voices for the Palestinian people. She's not one of them.
To Jamal's point, she did seem to acknowledge this isn't just Joe Biden waves a magic wand and suddenly there's a ceasefire. There's a lot of other stuff that needs to happen. The problem is that on the left, there are maybe millions of Democrats who believe that this is all 100% in Joe Biden's hands. And that's what he's dealing with politically.
Yeah, you know, a couple things, not to continue the piling on of the Congresswoman, but she did go on to say another thing that was not factual. She said that the discomfort, you would ask her a question, she said the discomfort, you know, for the first time in our nation's history that they're seeing these images come back and they're streaming back to them. Now, I wasn't necessarily alive or remember too much of this, but if I recall, the Vietnam War ended because that really was the first television war of horrific images streaming back that ended a war. she is right that Joe Biden isn't the only person who can get something fixed. But I will tell you, politically, that doesn't do Democrats any good, that interview tonight that she did. It does her no good because she's not necessarily offering a solution. She's just kind of throwing it out there and saying, well, maybe Israel needs to come to the table. It's a lot more complicated than that.
It certainly is. Everyone stick around for us, Laura.
Thanks, Abby. Next, House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan is going to join me live on those fiery and contentious moments in the testimony of Robert Hur, special counsel who investigated President Biden. Plus, we are awaiting results in key states. Results are expected to put Donald Trump over the top for his party's nomination. Everyone stand by.
My team and I conducted a thorough, independent investigation. We identified evidence that the president willfully retained classified materials after the end of his vice presidency when he was a private citizen. We did not, however, identify evidence that rose to the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Because the evidence fell short of that standard, I declined to recommend criminal charges against Mr. Biden.
Former special counsel Robert Hur testifying before the House Judiciary Committee today on his final report into President Biden's handling of classified documents. Both parties, frankly, took their shots. Republicans upset that Biden wasn't charged. Democrats mad about him raising questions about Biden's mental acuity. I want to bring in Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Congressman Jim Jordan. Thank you for joining us today. What a day, Congressman, because we were watching for hours, waiting to see what he would say about that report. A really key moment. He said that he did not exonerate Biden, Congressman, but he did decline to bring any charges because he didn't believe he could actually secure a conviction based on what he saw. He couldn't prove the intent, not just because of his age or his memory, but you took issue with that. Why?
Well, I think what the special counsel said was that he willfully retained classified information and then disclosed classified information to people who weren't allowed to get it. And I mean, this is a guy who's been in office for, close to 50 years, 5 decades, chaired the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. When he was vice president, he gets a daily intelligence brief. This is a guy who knows the law and knows the rules, and yet he violated those. And so for me, the key question, I raised this in my question, is why would he do that? What would motivate a guy to do that? And Robert Hur told us that. He said he had strong motivations to ignore, and this is Robert Hur's words, not mine, to ignore the procedures around classified documents because he was writing a book, and he wanted that information readily available to give to the ghostwriter who wasn't cleared to get it. And why would he want to do all that? $8 million. 8 million reasons he had. So that's the point I think was the most telling, because I always want to know what's the motive for someone who knows the rules to then violate the rules, which is exactly what President Biden did. But of course,
Congressman, on that point, I want to stop
Hur
for 1 second. Excuse me, I want to point out one thing, though, and I remember that moment because I think your phrase was he has 8 million reasons to do so, alluding to his book advance. But then if you go down to that part of the report, he continues on that he did not feel that he had the evidence that jurors might have been convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that that was enough to prove that it was willful, that the intent was there, and there could have been some innocent explanations.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, one of the, big pieces of evidence is what the ghostwriter who had the audio recording of that interview with President Biden, what he did with that information once he found out Robert Hur was named special counsel. What did this guy do? He deleted that information. He tried to destroy evidence. If that's not obstruction, I don't know what is. And I think that goes to motive as well. This ghostwriter knew that there was something, something wrong here. So I think that's a contributing factor in this whole scenario as well.
I did think it was, when you mentioned the idea of the ghostwriter sliding things into, I think, a recycling bin is what he mentioned. But on that point, if I go back to the report, and that seemed to be where Hur was really focused on, not wanting to go beyond the scope of it, he recognized that there was evidence that some jurors might have deemed as willfully retaining documents, maybe even the motivations you described. But the idea of the burden of proof was really the biggest part of all of this. But there was a fixation, it seemed, on the idea of Biden's mental acuity or his memory. I found that striking because you saw some of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle pointing out that Trump also shares some memory lapses. He also does make mistakes. Do you concede that both have a similar issue?
Oh, come on. Come on. I mean, everyone makes mistakes in life. I mean, we're human beings, for goodness sake. But there is no way you can say President Trump he's as sharp as they come. His memory is as strong. I was just with him over the weekend. I know, and the American people can see it for themselves. They've seen these examples of President Biden forgetting things. I mean, all kinds of examples that we actually played the press conference that President Biden gave in response to when Mr. Hur's report came out and showed that where it, again, I think it was maybe one of the worst press conferences I've ever seen. So to say there's a comparison there made no sense. I thought that what the Democrats did was actually just strange. They were taking snippets here and there, much different than what the American people see on a daily basis from our president. And look, I take no satisfaction in saying that. President Biden's the president of our country. You want our president to have his full faculties, but he obviously doesn't, and the country knows it. And it doesn't matter how many times Democrats say something different, the country can see for themselves and they understand it. And that is something that Mr. Hur pointed out. He said, Joe Biden is a forgetful old man, and that is one of the key reasons that I didn't bring charges. And it's why we've asked for the actual audio tapes, not just of Joe Biden's interviews, but all the witnesses Mr. Hur talked to. And we'll see if the Biden administration and the Justice Department turn those over to us. I think they should, so we can evaluate that, the United States Congress, and more importantly, the American people.
Well, I am eager to see how far you're willing to ask for those requests, the audio transcripts as well. But back to this point, because as you have offered that Biden has made mistakes, and certainly, objectively, there are mistakes made, and there have been statements that are known as the gaffes and beyond, but there was also a montage played of Donald Trump doing something, talking about not knowing the dates of his marriage, confusing the names of world leaders. I wonder why, if the notion is that there is a double standard being placed on Donald Trump, isn't it true that there's also a double standard then for President Biden with respect to his mistakes? Why should the American people credit one versus the other if both make similar mistakes that have been played in that actual hearing?
Laura, come on. I mean, there are three people who've run for president the last 3 cycles: Secretary Clinton, President Biden, and President Trump. All three have been accused of mishandling classified information. Only one is getting prosecuted. Hillary Clinton took a hammer to cell phones, took bleach bit to laptops and computers. I mean, you got to be kidding me. The idea that there's not a double standard and the Justice Department isn't going after President Trump, I think is laughable to disagree with that. Anybody can see it. First it was they spied on his campaign. Then it was the special counsel, $30 million, 19 lawyers, 40 FBI agents, Mueller's special counsel. They found nothing. Then it was impeachment. Then it was raid his home. Then it was Jack Smith's special counsel. Then it was the 14th Amendment, which was bogus. If you don't believe me, just look what the Supreme Court said, 9-0. I mean, and now it's this latest thing. I mean, come on, of course there's a double standard, and anybody with common sense can see it. And I think that's one of the key reasons why President Trump is ahead in every single poll, and Joe Biden's approval numbers are at, 35%.
I certainly think if you look broadly at the system of justice in this country, there are issues with a two-tiered justice system, obviously for the wealthy and those who do not have the means. But I want to narrow your focus, Congressman, away from the broad and to what Hur was focused on instead, because he did respond to this idea that there was a distinction, and huge distinctions, between the behavior of Trump in the handling of documents and that of Biden, specifically in what happened after the request to return those documents. And frankly, the distinctions he believes is maybe what led to the prosecution of Trump and not Biden. I mean, why, do you really think that if Trump had returned the documents, had not doubled down, had cooperated, had not had this 1.5-year expanse between the first request and then, of course, the appointment of special counsel, that he would also still be charged?
I don't think it would have mattered what President Trump did. I think Jack Smith was going to go. I think the fact that Merrick Garland picked Jack Smith, the same guy who was looking for ways to go after the very people that Lois Lerner and the IRS targeted 15 years ago, conservative Tea Party people around the country. I think the fact that he picked Jack Smith just changed everything. He was going to go after President Trump no matter what he did. I mean, I just think that's, and then, of course, I just think that's the case, and because we've seen it time and time again, that whole litany of examples where they've used this lawfare, this weaponization of government to go after President Trump. But, Laura, today wasn't about President Trump. Today was about Robert Hur's examination of Joe Biden. And we laid out the facts there, and Robert Hur laid out the facts. That's what when Jack Smith completes this, when that's all over, I'll come over and talk about that. But I know Jack Smith's been out to get President Trump from the get-go, and I actually think that's why the Justice Department, Merrick Garland, selected him.
But You brought up the former President Donald Trump as part of the double standard, and there's also great explanation and pains from this report.
No,
from
you
Mr.
brought up the fact that Democrats brought up President Trump, and that's why I gave that. 3 people ran for president: Secretary Clinton, President Biden, President Trump. Only one's been, they've all been accused of mishandling classified documents, but only one of them is getting prosecuted. And the American people see that.
I do hear you. Let's not do the chicken and the egg dance for a second of which came first. Trump was raised today as part of the conversation. Noted. Trump was raised today in front of the hearing, as was some comparisons that were made from others. Hillary Clinton is a favorite as well. Of course, the documents that she was reported to have, James Comey, as we know, addressed those as carelessly maintained, but chose not to pursue prosecution with the U.S. Attorney and, of course, the Attorney General for various reasons. But I want to focus again on this double standard, Congressman, because there is a distinction between the behavior post-recognition of the possession of documents. And so the behavior of Biden to speak with the investigators, to hand over documents and beyond, is very different than what the former President Donald Trump did. Does that not factor in at all for you, that there are key distinctions in how one doubled down and the other cooperated? That doesn't matter at all?
The double standard is, you said it, careless behavior. That's how you said former FBI Director Comey characterized Secretary Clinton. Careless behavior, I'm not going to prosecute. With Joe Biden, it was, oh, he's a forgetful old man who might appear sympathetic to a jury. I'm not going to prosecute, even though he retained information and disclosed it to someone who wasn't allowed to get it. I'm not going to prosecute. But with President Trump, we're going to go after him because we don't think he cooperated enough. That's the allegation. That hasn't been proven. We got the final report from Robert Hur, and we know what took place there. There is definitely a double standard, and it goes against. And here's the other thing: this is the Justice Department prosecuting the president's political opponent. Joe Biden's Justice Department is going after the guy he's running against for president of the United States. That, to me, is also critically important, and I think the American people evaluate it that way as well.
Why does the fact that you've got a special counsel assigned to oversee it, and he himself, in response to questions today, Mr. Hur said that he did not feel restricted, he did not feel interfered with, he didn't think there was any undue influence, that he had the resources he needed to fully investigate this. He was previously a Trump appointee, and he has made statements that colleagues like Adam Schiff had called gratuitous about his memory. I do wonder, though, if these are his statements. These are
Trump
his statements, Congressman.
He was appointed by Merrick Garland. I mean, Merrick Garland, the Biden...
Congressman, excuse me, he was appointed for this by Merrick Garland. In the past,
that's
he
what
had
matters.
been a part of the Trump appointment.
Of course, but that's what matters. The Attorney General for Joe Biden, Merrick Garland, appointed him as the special counsel. That's what matters. So, okay, the Democrats, they're going to get mad at Robert Hur and say all the things they said in the hearing today. He was appointed by the Democrat Attorney General, for goodness sake, and he found what he found. And he didn't prosecute, for goodness sake. Again, I think highlighting this double standard.
Well, I do wonder one more point about this, because in the past, and I remember this came out after the Mueller report, you wanted the public, when it came to having read the special counsel report, and of course I'm paraphrasing you here when I bring this up, that you believed it was appropriate to move on and get back to the business of legislating. And now it seems that you want to pursue the audio and beyond. Why are you not satisfied by the conclusion of the special counsel? Is it because the result was not what you'd like? Because you seem to be... I want to finish my question. I just want to finish my question so I can be very clear for the audience. They can get the benefit of both of our conversations.
Sure.
You are in line with the finding that, and the belief that his memory was an issue, but then the conclusion of the report seems to be the only thing that's problematic. So can you really have it both ways?
I think Robert Hur, to some extent, is having it both ways. Joe Biden met the elements of the crime, but because he's a sympathetic guy who, a forgetful older man, we're not going to prosecute. Okay, that's the thing. Well, let us see for ourselves. Give us the audio tapes, not just of Joe Biden, but all the witnesses you talked to. We got the transcripts this morning from just Joe Biden. We'd like all the transcripts, and frankly, we'd like the audio tapes, as I said, for every witness, 147 witnesses he talked to, we'd like that information. And oh, by the way, the White House did try to influence this. There were 5 letters sent to about the special counsel over the course of his 1-year investigation. The first 3 all went to, over that time frame, all went to Robert Hur. The last 2, they tried to jump over him when they went to the Associate Deputy Attorney General and to Merrick Garland himself, saying, we think the report should be changed. And they were trying to change the very section we were just talking about, where Robert Hur referenced Joe Biden's mental state and the fact that he's a forgetful older man. So they did try to influence that. The special counsel for the president in the White House, his lawyer and also his personal lawyer, sent letters to the Attorney General and the Associate Deputy Attorney General. After the report was given to the White House first, they tried to get it changed before we, the people in the Congress, got the actual report.
I know we have to go, and I do thank you for your time, but if I can ask one more question of you, Congressman, it seems pretty clear that you believe, well, thank you, but it's our conversation. It's very clear that you believe that President Biden broke the law. If he is the baseline, is Donald Trump the next level of the law breaking, such that he should also be prosecuted?
You're missing the point, Laura. It's about the same standard. Equal application of the law. No double
So he
standard.
should also
we
be
have seen
prosecuted.
it. No, we have seen this double standard time. I didn't say Joe Biden should be prosecuted, and certainly President Trump shouldn't be. What I'm saying is apply the law across the board equally. That is a hallmark of our system. And a bunch of the people in this great country, millions of Americans, think government has been weaponized against we the people. We see at times whether it's censoring certain thoughts and big government weighing in with big tech. On and on it goes. So that is the concern, and particularly this Justice Department that said parents who go to school board meetings are terrorists, pro-life Catholics are extremists. And the unequal application of the law. That is my concern, and that's what has to change, because that is a hallmark of this country, the greatest country ever.
Well, we will have to conclude for the day. Thank you for your time. I'm sure you are very exhausted. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us this evening.
My pleasure, Laura. Take care.
Thank you. Let's talk about this now. In the testimony, we've got Republican strategist Sir Michael Singleton, former Biden 2020 campaign advisor Ashley Allison, CNN senior justice correspondent Evan Perez, and former federal prosecutor Elliot Williams. Evan, you heard the conversation, as you all did, because our audio is clear. Let me ask you, when you were hearing the conversation, there were some moments in terms of the dismissal of the points that really were in the Robert Hur document, particularly what couldn't be proven.
Right. I mean, look, the congressman is known for how he talks very, very quickly. That was rapid fire. And there was a lot there that I think it just needs to be, perhaps corrected, right? Because there's a lot of things that he said that if you read the report and if you look at what the investigation found, they just don't align with what he's saying. So, a couple of things. One of the things that he is talking about is the idea that Joe Biden was talking to his ghostwriter. One of the things at the end of today's hearing, Ken Buck was the last guy, was the guy who was batting cleanup. At the end of the hearing, he asked one of the most illuminating questions, which is to get Robert Hur to address why it was that, when he was talking to the ghostwriter and said, was alleged to have been sharing classified information, why wasn't that enough? What was missing? Mm-hmm. And Hur explained it. He said that the house that Biden was living in was a rented house in Virginia, that it is possible the documents were never there. And, you read the transcript of this interview, they spent a lot of time in that interview trying to talk to Joe Biden and ask him about that. They were trying to get into his head of what was he thinking when he said, I just found classified documents downstairs. And what Hur concluded, is that they couldn't stand that up. They couldn't prove that, A, the documents were ever there, or that he even knew what he was talking about. They might have been confused, right?
Or that the nature of the documents included evidence that was classified as opposed to notebooks and the like.
Right, and by the way, that's one of the key things, is that the ideas of these notebooks, whether they're classified or whether they are diaries and should be treated the way Ronald Reagan treated his diaries, that's part of this larger story, right? There's another thing that he gets into, which is this idea that there's a two-tiered system of justice. Is something we've heard a lot from Republicans over the last few months, and it really doesn't hold up, because if you look at the Trump case, you can see clearly what happened there, right? If he had simply returned the documents, if he had simply responded to a subpoena, a lawful subpoena from a judge to return documents, he would never have been charged. And so, there would have been exactly the same thing, right? Joe Biden sat for 5 hours of interviews when President Trump was under investigation by the Mueller investigation. He had a take-home test and responded in written form. So there's so many things that he's right. There's different systems. I mean, there's different ways, but it's not the way he, I think, perceives it.
I am always curious about the way in which people talk about the two-tiered system of justice only as it relates to Donald Trump and nothing as it relates to the average defendant in this country.
Is that for me?
Yes, it is.
I mean, I am so confused on what Republicans actually want in this moment. So what was the point of today's hearing? For a gotcha moment that they never got, right? So they say Hillary Clinton wasn't taking the trial. Well, she wasn't president. She ran for president. A lot of people run for president, but she never actually became president. Mike Pence was vice president. He found classified documents. Where's his special counsel? It's not the case because he did what Joe Biden did. In this instance, the Justice Department decided not to have a two-tier justice system. They said, we have a special counsel for Donald Trump, and you know what? We're going to have one for Joe Biden, and they're going to independently, without Merrick Garland getting into the case, go over, and the outcomes will be the outcomes. Merrick Garland didn't interfere. Her testified that today with the outcomes of it. But then when they read to your question that you asked him, it's like, well, what part of the report are you okay with saying is real and others that are not grounded on real substance? So you're okay with saying that you think he's a forgetful old man because that plays to your benefit, but you're not okay with her saying there's no grounds because he didn't break the law or he wouldn't say exonerate, but he shouldn't go to trial because they wouldn't be able to get a conviction. So I find it weird that like some of it they are satisfied with because it plays to their advantage and some of it they don't.
That's politics.
Yeah, I mean, it is politics. I mean, look, I think her came off as someone who is not a partisan political actor. I think a lot of Republicans, to the point that Ashley just made, they were hoping her was going to buy more into the idea that Biden is this old, feeble person, because politically a lot of people look at the president and they do believe he's too old. Republicans, Democrats alike, for the most part, do agree on that disadvantage Biden compared to Trump. However, politically speaking, I'm not certain that this moves the needle, but what it does do, and you heard the congressman talk about this at the very end of your discussion. He talked about the weaponization of government. Why are they going after the individual who's running against the president? They went after the moms and school boards. He went down this litany of things, this grievance that a lot of Republican voters do have about the justice system, about the current political bureaucracy, generally speaking, and about President Biden. And I think ultimately that's what this is more about, mobilizing those Republican MAGA supporters than it really is about finding a smoking gun, because I think most people who saw this probably walked away saying, I didn't really learn anything new.
But Elliot, that question is not really rhetorical as to why they're going after certain people, particularly the former president. There's an answer to it, and her describes it.
Yeah. Well, and look, and I think Ashley Allison described it perfectly with 2 words, Mike Pence. And I think so much of this has become a binary between why are they charging Donald Trump but not Joe Biden and so on. Forget Trump and Biden. Look at the case of Pence. It's another instance of an individual who behaved, as you can even say Joe Biden did, irresponsibly with respect to classified documents, as virtually every president and vice president in American history has in some way. Now, the question is, could you criminally prove that this person violated a statute? The simple fact is, with respect to Joe Biden, you could not. The simple fact is, with respect to Mike Pence, you could not. Based on the evidence that is in the record with respect to President Trump, you can. It's there. And then on top of the misbehavior with respect to the documents, there's the added crime of obstruction of justice, which you do not have by any stretch of the imagination with Joe Biden or Mike Pence. And so all of this rush to make it a binary double standard between we're treating one president different than another, you're forgetting the sort of control sample in this test, which is you had a vice president of the United States who engaged in largely the same conduct and also wasn't charged because neither of them committed crimes.
But for Republican voters, it is a binary choice. I want to be clear on that. It really
fine.
is.
That's no, Shmarkle, that's absolutely fine.
Well, listen, guess what you can't get a conviction off of? Narratives.
And you can't get a conviction off of like your
evidence.
feelings.
Only evidence. Yeah. If you can get a conviction off of feelings, man. Plenty more to discuss. Everyone stick around.
Please do stick around. There's more to come. Donald Trump, he is inching closer to that magic number. We will go straight to David Chalian at the delegate desk, as the former president is now minutes away from ending officially this Republican nominating contest. More special CNN live coverage. Stand by. Tonight, two numbers, two candidates, two thresholds. We're talking about delegate math here, and the two contests for the major party nominations that will end tonight. CNN's David Chalian is tallying up all of that math. David, Joe Biden, he's already there. Donald Trump will be shortly. What's the update that you've got out of Georgia about where he stands?
Yeah, who doesn't love a little delegate math, Abby? Take a look here. There are 59 delegates at stake in Georgia. We're now able to allocate all 59 delegates to Donald Trump, who we projected earlier this evening will win the state of Georgia in this primary. But Nikki Haley's not going to get a high enough statewide percentage to win any delegates here, even though she's dropped out of the race. All 59 delegates to Donald Trump. That means, add that to his total, he's at 1188. Now, notice up there, it says 1215. He needs 1,215 delegates to secure the Republican nomination. He is 27 delegates away. We are waiting for the polls to close in Washington state in just 6 minutes or so, and we will see if we're able to get him over the top with the initial vote returns from Washington state, Abby.
All right, we will be standing by for that, David. Thank you. And we have much more of our continuing coverage of the primaries tonight. Polls close, as David just said, in Washington state in just a few minutes. Stand by for that.
Tonight, a big and important vibe shift. The 2024 campaign puts the primaries now in the rearview mirror and steamrolls towards a bruising general election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Welcome to a special hour of Laura Coates Live. I'm Laura Coates in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Abby Phillip in New York. In just a few seconds, polls in Washington state will close. And in any moment, CNN may be able to make a major projection tonight that Donald Trump will break that delegate barrier, 1,215 delegates, to complete a swift and a stunning campaign to prove that MAGA reigns supreme once again in the Republican Party. On the Democratic side, Joe Biden just finished off his march to the Democratic nomination just a few hours ago, officially crossing his delegate threshold thanks to Georgia. The symmetry there sets up a 2020 rematch and turns the temperature all the way up at an already contentious, fever-pitched battle fueled by hundreds of millions of dollars.
CNN political director David Chalian joins us now with a look at that delegate count, the critical number that will say if Joe Biden and Donald Trump will end up locking in their nominations. David, CNN predicted that President Biden clinched the Democratic nomination early in the evening, but we're still actually waiting on Trump. So where does that stand?
Yes, we're waiting for some votes to come in for Washington state. I don't see any yet as I check the latest tallies here, but that will likely put Donald Trump over the top. Look at where we are, Laura. Donald Trump needs 1,215 delegates to secure the Republican Party nomination. There's no mystery. We know Donald Trump's going to be the Republican nominee. He's currently at 1,188. He's 27 delegates away. Let's take a look at what that means in terms of percentages, because this is really an astonishing number. Donald Trump has won 92% of the delegates already awarded in this Republican nomination contest. 92%. A former president who is on trial across 4 criminal cases, dominating this Republican nomination season, the party overwhelmingly selecting him to be their standard bearer going forward. What does that mean in terms of what Donald Trump needs? He only needs 2.4% of all the remaining delegates this nomination season to secure the party's nomination. He's going to get that in these next few moments, probably, as we await vote from Washington state. And because it is a quasi-winner-take-all, if the candidate is gets more than 50% of the vote, roughly, they're going to get all the delegates. And so we expect in Washington state Donald Trump to cross that threshold and hit a real pivot moment as he becomes the presumptive Republican nominee, Laura.
On the Democratic side, David, Joe Biden did get the nomination, I guess, clinched for delegates not long ago. What is the latest for him?
Yeah, he's well over that 1,968 needed to secure the Democratic nomination. He's at 2,011. He'll continue to add to his delegate total tonight. But Joe Biden who, as you know, is on his fourth campaign for the presidency in his life, has secured the Democratic Party nomination for re-election here. The delegates will make it official in Chicago this summer at the Democratic National Convention. But it is astonishing to see that with all the concerns many Democrats had about Joe Biden as their standard bearer this cycle, given his age, the vitality questions and whatnot, that he really didn't have much competition. So whatever that hand-wringing had been, it didn't materialize into any substantial candidacy to threaten his nomination in any way this entire season. And tonight, he crossed the threshold and is the presumptive Democratic nominee.
David Chalian, thank you so much. You know, John King is at the Magic Wall for us with the latest on what we're seeing. John, what can you tell us?
Well, Laura, now, as David notes, we move on, right? It's not official yet, but Joe Biden is the presumptive Democratic nominee. Donald Trump, in a matter of minutes, should be the presumptive Republican nominee. This is the Democratic map. I'll show you the Republican map, just waiting to see, watch as I'm talking, to see if any votes come in up in Washington State there. The polls are now closed. So what do you do now if you're the candidates? There's a lot you can't control, but Donald Trump has something he can control. He has to pick a running mate, right? When's he going to get on that decision? He has to deal with his trials that you know better than most coming up. When are they scheduled? How do they affect the campaign? Those are things he has to deal with. Joe Biden has to address weaknesses from the primary. So let's start with him because he's going to be on the road the next few days, right? Where's he going? He's got a schedule in Michigan. Remember, uncommitted, got 13% of the vote there. Younger voters, Arab Americans in the state of Michigan, especially mad over the president's Israel, Hamas policies. He has to deal with that. He's also moving on to Wisconsin soon. We haven't had a primary there yet, but this was a battleground state, 11,000 votes last time. I was out there a couple months ago. Joe Biden has a morale problem, a motivation, an excitement problem, especially in the black community in Milwaukee. That's where he's going to be for an infrastructure event. So you see that. So address your weaknesses. Now you have 8 months to November with the conventions in between. For Donald Trump, we're seeing more evidence of that tonight. Again, waiting for Washington State. That will put him over the top. But Laura, you look at Atlanta, and again, if you just look at this, right, that's all Donald Trump. And it's 85%. So if you're a Trump Republican, you're saying, wow, big win. That's great. That's awesome. And he's going to clinch tonight. That's all true. That's big. If you're a Republican and you're a Trump fan, that's awesome. And he's going to clinch tonight. But when you look in here, Nikki Haley's out of the race still, right? Remember, Georgia was 11,000 votes in 2020 in the general election. Joe Biden won. This is DeKalb County. Nikki Haley's getting 40%. She's not in the race anymore. Donald Trump's problem in the suburbs continues. Move up a little bit over here to Gwinnett County. Donald Trump getting 77% there. That's better, but still 20% in the suburbs for Nikki Haley. Fulton County, Atlanta, and the suburbs around an overwhelmingly Democratic area. It will be blue in November. However, if you're Donald Trump, you need to cut into the margins by getting some of those suburban votes. Nikki Haley getting 38% there. Just move over and look here at Cobb County, 22% there. So throughout this, right, in Georgia, Laura, and throughout this, only Vermont going for Nikki Haley, an overwhelmingly strong performance for Donald Trump in the primaries. As David noted, 92% of the delegates so far. That percentage is likely to go up when Washington State comes in and the states that have yet to vote. But even as you see strength, if you're a smart campaign, you're starting your weaknesses. For Donald Trump, that is in the suburbs.
John King, thank you so much. Stand by. Again, we are minutes away from seeing the first results out of Washington State, where the polls have just closed. Kristen Holmes has been speaking with her sources inside the Trump campaign. Kristen, what are you hearing from them?
Well, Laura, about tonight, not really much, because if you think about it, Donald Trump has really been acting as though he is the presumptive nominee for several weeks. Even before Nikki Haley dropped out, they were starting to pivot to the general election, looking at these key battleground states. And I do want to address something that John was just talking about in terms of these suburban voters. This is something that Donald Trump's campaign knows that they have to work on. They see a weakness there. What they're trying to do now is find other voting blocks, particularly Democratic voting blocks, in which they see cracks in the system in terms of people who maybe are disinterested in Biden, who don't want to vote for the president, and they want to try to siphon those voters off. One key demographic in Georgia, black male voters. They see an opening there. Now, part of that is that they want to actively recruit black voters. They have seen a small uptick in polls between the exit polls in 2016 and 2020 in terms of black support. They also think that Donald Trump could bring in some of those voters. They do not think that they're going to change the entire demographic or voting bloc. This is just about getting enough voters to offset those suburban voters, to offset those independent voters. In Michigan, you're looking at working class voters. That's what Donald Trump's team is trying to do, to drive a wedge between Biden and that traditionally Democratic voting bloc, which is labor unions. We have seen that time and time again. Donald Trump has been courting the Teamsters, trying to get any rank and file members he can. Now, what they're really working on now is this strategy to take over the RNC and take over the party and use that infrastructure in these key battleground states. And I was told by a number of advisors that there are really 7 states that they're the most focused on. That includes Michigan, Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, states that they believe are going to be very competitive, that they believe some of them, which Donald Trump won in 2016 and lost in 2020, and they believe that they could take again, and they are necessary to take again on the path to the White House. So what you're going to start seeing in the upcoming weeks is Donald Trump building out their not only ground game in these states, using the RNC and the infrastructure they already have, but also honing in on the strategy they want for these particular battleground states, because again, Donald Trump is going to have his voters turn out. They are motivated to turn out in these southern states, in these red states. It's all about the critical purple states. Can he drive turnout, and can they try to depress turnout for Biden enough to get him into the White House?
The great offset. Kristen Holmes, thank you so much. Abby?
And as we talk tonight about the presidential matchup, there is also suspense in Congress in Washington. The Republicans, they have a razor-thin majority in the House, and it just got a little thinner. Colorado Republican Congressman Ken Buck, he made a surprise announcement today that he is resigning at the end of next week. Buck had already said that he wasn't going to run for re-election in November, but he told CNN's Dana Bash that he couldn't wait any longer.
But a lot of this is personal, and that's the problem. Instead of having decorum, instead of operating in a professional manner, this place has just evolved into this bickering and nonsense, and not really doing the job for the American people.
Is it that bad that you're saying, I'm done?
It is the worst year of the 9 years and 3 months that I've been in Congress. And having talked to former members, it's the worst year in 40, 50 years to be in Congress.
Well, tell us how you really feel. Buck's decision will trim the Republicans' slim edge in the House to 218 seats compared to 213 for the Democrats. That means Speaker Mike Johnson can only afford to lose 2 Republicans on any given party line vote. Let's get back to our panel here in New York. Scott, wow. But he's not wrong. It does suck to be in Congress in general, but it seems like for Republicans...
Tell us how you really feel.
I mean, in the House...
Yeah.
All you do is spend your time raising money. When you're a Republican, you're spending all your time raising money and taking votes on things that don't seem to matter all that much.
You know, call me old-fashioned, but I'm still of the opinion that if you go to the voters of a congressional district and ask them to send you to Congress for 2 years, you should do your job. I mean, I appreciate that he is having a bad experience, and I appreciate that he personally feels like he's inconvenienced by being in the United States Congress, but you know, I think for most people who get up and go to work for a living every day, not every day is a lot of fun. Now, does it suck to be in Congress? I don't know. It's better than other jobs you could have, I guess.
Name them.
All right, everyone stand by just 1 second. We have a major projection to make right here on CNN. CNN can now officially project that Donald Trump has eclipsed the delegate threshold to officially clinch the Republican nomination for President of the United States. We can say that because CNN can project that the former president has won Washington state. That milestone puts the country on a path toward a 2020 rematch. David Chalian is back with us here. David, give us an update on where we stand now in this delegate watch.
Yeah, you just said it, Abby. Donald Trump has crossed the threshold. The former president has yet again secured the Republican Party nomination for the 3rd presidential election cycle in a row. 1,215 delegates are needed to win. Look at that Donald Trump number. He is now at 1,219 delegates. This is after we were able to allocate 31 delegates from Washington state into Donald Trump's column. He's going to win Washington state tonight. We still have 12 delegates from Washington state to assign, but we have enough in Donald Trump's column to put him over the edge. Look at where we are at Donald Trump's trajectory overall in this race. 1,219 delegates. And if you look at it by percentages, you will see Donald Trump has won overwhelmingly. The vast majority, north of 92% of the delegates up for grabs in this nomination season so far. A big percentage to close it out. He makes it look as if it was really never in doubt for the former president, Abby.
If you look at that disparity there, it's huge. And this also makes Donald Trump one of the earliest to clinch the nominations at this point in a primary process. I want to go now to John King, who's over at the Magic Wall still. John, what more are we learning now that we have Washington State officially projected in Donald Trump's column? How did he get here?
Abby, I think David just laid out the numbers. Sometimes you don't need words. Just look. Just look. One state, Vermont, for Nikki Haley, coast to coast. From Maine and South Carolina and Georgia along the East Coast, all the way over to California. Alaska's not really there on your map. You all know that, folks. It's up here. That's where we put it so you can see it. But from coast to coast, a Donald Trump march, with one exception, the state of Vermont. And in Washington State tonight, putting him over the top. Right now, he's at 73% of the vote. Again, conversation we've been having throughout the primary campaign, Abby. Great strengths for Donald Trump. Big wins for Donald Trump. More than 90% of the delegates for Donald Trump. But you are seeing some weaknesses in the sense that, especially in suburban areas, let's just go to King County right here where Seattle is, the biggest population center in the state of Washington. Nikki Haley at the moment getting 34% of the vote. Donald Trump's getting 61%. 61% wins. This is a blue Democratic area, so a lot of Republicans at home are saying, so what? You're not going to win Washington State if you're Donald Trump, but if you want to win the suburbs in other places, you have to learn the lessons everywhere. So you're seeing a bit of it here, even though Washington State has put Donald Trump over the top. You see he needs 12-15. He's going to have at least 12-19. That number is going to go up. He'll get more of the delegates from Washington when we allocate them. He'll get Hawaii later on tonight. But from Washington, Atlanta also came in tonight. Georgia, forgive me. And in the suburbs around Georgia, again, you see the same problem. Nikki Haley in DeKalb County getting 40% if you round up. In Fulton County, yes, I know Republicans, it's a huge Democratic area, but you can't let your Republican opponent get that. That means you're weak among suburban moderates who could go for Joe Biden in a key battleground state in the fall. So for both of these candidates, here's your map for Donald Trump. Here's your map for Joe Biden. It is March 12th. We officially have presumptive nominees. Now the many, many more questions, Abby, between now and the conventions in November, including a running mate for Donald Trump, and how many third-party candidates make the ballots in what states?
Yeah, exactly right. John King, thank you very much. And back here in New York with our panel, Scott, after all of this, it's Trump and Biden again.
Yeah, boy, America, you can hear the cheering outside. It's deafening, the people who are so excited about what we're about to...
They're taking down the goal.
And yet it is overwhelming. I mean, look at those maps. It's all blue and pretty much all red. It may not be hugely exciting, but the voters spoke in a resounding fashion.
Well, I actually think it is exciting because I have no idea who's going to win. I mean, some days I wake up and think Trump has the advantage. Some days I think, incumbent president would have the advantage. I know this, since the State of the Union, the polling hasn't looked very good for Joe Biden. Right now, in the national polling average, he is at his lowest job approval of his presidency. And Donald Trump looks like he just rolled up a really easy victory in the Republican Party. So right now, I'd have to say Trump's ahead. We got a long way to go, but Trump looks like he's got the momentum right now to me.
He also has a really interesting advantage, Trump, for all of his problems. The bar by his voters is set very low, right? I mean, he can be a liar. He can be a loser, a literal loser who lost it all for the White House, the Senate. He could be a convicted criminal and they would still vote for him. He could be a rapist. He can be all the things. He can flub policy. He can change his mind on policy. For Joe Biden, his voters hold him to a much higher standard. You have key constituencies and black voters, Hispanic voters, young voters who are telling Joe Biden, do better, be better for us. Israel is a big issue he is having to deal with his own party. When he flubs, Democrats are worried about his age, about his fitness. So Trump has this advantage of having an entirely loyal voter base for whom the bar is set incredibly low, and Biden has to deal with a very high bar set by his voters. Meanwhile, we're all looking for the bar to drown our sorrows at the state of affairs.
And you can hear the
open all night in New York.
You can hear the frustration. That is exactly what SE is talking about. The frustration I hear from Democrats right now is exactly that. They think that Biden is being held to a higher standard. Democrats
He should be.
He is the
Hey, we shouldn't go down to
standard. But it's also Democrats holding him to that
they
standard too.
They are. No. And Essie is absolutely right. I mean, what did Donald Trump say? I could walk out on Fifth Avenue, shoot somebody, and I would get away with it. I mean, the fact of the matter was we laughed at him at the time, and the reality is he probably could get away with it nowadays. right now, what Democrats need to do, and look, there's still so much road ahead of us. Democrats really need to stop attacking, their guy if they want him to win in November. Now, Congresswoman Omar, who you interviewed last hour, she said that she was behind Joe Biden and that she was going to be behind him. Well, all her friends better get behind Joe Biden, because what I certainly have seen with the Gaza and the Israel situation is that it's spreading beyond like the Muslim communities. It is spreading to young people who weren't necessarily engaged and now are becoming engaged. And I do think that is problematic for the Democratic Party.
This is another differentiation that we do see in the polls. The New York Times Siena poll from a couple weeks ago showed something similar. Donald Trump, when you ask people who voted for him in 2020, 97% of them say they're coming right back. Joe Biden, that same question, he's at mid-80s. So he's got some consolidating to do. Are Democrats acknowledging that?
Of course he's got some consolidating to do. The polls are obvious that this is not a great poll position for him to be in. The difference here is, though, mostly Donald Trump's vote hasn't really changed that much. This is all about Joe Biden voters who have fallen away, and they've got to get them to come back. And as my friends, some other friends of mine would say, it's a lot easier to get a lapsed Baptist to come back to church than it is to convince somebody to convert to your religion, right? So you've got to just go back out there and go and proselytize, right, to these folks who have said that, I'm not so happy, the people that SE were just talking about, who are kind of like on the fence about Joe Biden. But here's the thing. We gave Donald Trump a field test, right? Everybody was nervous in 2016, and we thought, boy, we're really taking a gamble. We picked Donald Trump, we'll see what happens. We gave him a field test. And when the crisis struck, when the biggest crisis of the American experience, probably in 100 years, happened, he failed it miserably with the pandemic, right? And we were all in a horrible place. Then he loses the election. Time for him to have a peaceful transfer of power. Every president, going back to George Washington, has done this well. He not just flubbed it, he took in the exact opposite position of a peaceful transfer of power and helped foment an insurrection, right? So we have seen this. And then Joe Biden's field test, we have an economy that's growing. We're getting back to where we're supposed to be. He's like a normal person. You may not agree with him on all the policy, but he's not screwing it up.
Well, Scott, I'm seeing your brow is furrowed. I'm going to give you the last word to explain that.
More people died from COVID on Joe Biden's watch than Donald Trump. That's number one. Number two, if you want to talk about why people are coming off, it's not just the Israel-Hamas war. It's the economy and it's inflation. There are core Democrat, working class, union, non-college educated, multiracial, coalition type voters who are pissed. They can't buy a house. They can't buy a car. They're running in place at best, and they are not in line with the Democratic Party culturally, and they're looking for somebody who even speaks a language they understand. That's why Biden's having trouble, and that's why they're shopping around for Donald Trump.
I know you said last word for Scott, but I do have to say this. There is a cultural moment that people do agree with, which is that they are pro-democracy, and they also think women should have abortion rights. And we have seen those two issues in election after election.
Well, we can't
matter for Democrats.
We can't forget about that. That's not a side note. It was good that you stepped into that. That's a central issue in this election. So we got to remember that that's what's coming down the pike for Democrats and Republicans. Laura, back to you.
Thank you. There's so much to unpack. First of all, you guys, we have now officially the official rematch, and I see all of you excited, especially you, Ashley Allison. What's your reaction? It's official. I mean, it's not the nomination of the actual conventions, but you've got the Trump-Biden rematch. And voters, here's the time to lean in.
Yeah, so, I think on the Republican side, it's clear that it's going to be Donald Trump that sets the narrative for the entire race for his voters. I think on the Democratic side, it will be Joe Biden doing the umbrella, top 30,000-foot approach. But I think actually part of building the coalition is building a coalition of people also running for office and being able to carry out a message to say, from the top of the ticket all the way down, we are trying to make sure on the state level we're protecting women's rights to choose. Nationally, we'll protect women's right to choose. We want to protect democracy so we can elect city council members and governors on off-cycle races. And on presidential, when a result comes in, we get it certified and we don't have an insurrection. And I think that if the Democrats can actually weave those narratives together, I understand the whole coalition is not there yet. And, you know, Jamal said earlier, it's like it's easier to get somebody to come back to church than to get to them to convert. It's also easier to win an argument when you don't yell at people and tell them they're stupid for believing something. Instead, you listen to them, you come in dialogue and you have conversation, you find your commonalities. That's the whole point of building a coalition. You don't always get your way. You don't always get your way. The Republicans aren't acting like that in the House right now, but that's how you build a coalition. And eventually you are able to weave the numbers together to win the race.
Well, I mean, a lot of Republican voters feel that they're being talked down to and disrespected and discarded by many people in your party. But look, I think this is going to be a very, very tight race. And you talked about the abortion issue. We know that Democrats are attempting to get abortion on ballots across the country. Republicans should be concerned about that. That's likely going to drive up turnout. Scott mentioned the economy. That is a pivotal issue that the former president is leading compared to the current president. People trust him more. They believe the economy was better then than it is now. So you're looking at on the margins. So as a strategist, I'm looking at variability here. What's my range and what's my variance from the individuals in the middle that I know where they are? But the other individuals that their number 2 or their number 3 issue, how can I communicate to them to ultimately move them? Not to get into all the math, but that's what strategists, that's what both of these campaigns need to absolutely focus on going into November.
I think now that it's somewhat official, that we shouldn't underestimate the degree to which so many Americans are really resisting this inevitability. I have spent the last several months traveling the country to some of these battleground states speaking to voters. And they were really resisting this. We're seeing, I think, a large appetite this cycle for third-party candidates, people flirting with third-party candidates in a way that maybe previously they didn't. There were a lot of Republican voters hanging on with Nikki Haley until the bitter end. And so that really is of concern. And then when you listen to the messages from the campaigns, a lot of it isn't an affirmative argument for why they should be the ones voters should choose. A lot of it is the alternative is so much worse. That is not really an inspiring message to new voters, to first-time voters. And
Not
so,
vote for, vote against.
Exactly. And so I'm curious to see how they bring especially young people into the fold, because you have to inspire millennials and Gen Z rather, to vote for something.
You know, to your point, Eva, about this idea of the inevitability, I think was the word you used, that this is now happening. And I'm genuinely curious about whether people have really confronted the idea of Trump the candidate. Now, there's Trump the idea still sort of frozen in amber from 2020, but for the most part, for the last several years, he's been an outside agitator, but not a candidate for office. He has not debated another Republican. He has not debated the President of the United States. And now that people are starting to tune in, now look, everybody knows Donald Trump, everybody knows Joe Biden, but I'm really curious as to, now that he's actually a candidate, how does that change things? It might not at all. As Scott was saying just a moment ago, certainly people might stay with him, stay on the team, or defect or not. But I think that this next couple months with the reality of Trump, not the idea of Trump, I really want to see where it goes.
You know, I don't think that every voter is going to vote for the same reason.
Yeah.
So I do think some people will go to the polls because the alternative of Donald Trump is so scary that they just cannot imagine it. And those may be some of those Nikki Haley voters, and that's the message you continue to drive for them. But for the young folks, I think you can do the look at the alternative, somebody who wants to continue to destroy our environment. Joe Biden has done more for climate, to stop climate change than any president in its history, and people were surprised. And during the midterms, people really credited it for him. And I think that he's hit a patch where he's going to have to figure out how to tell people this is not an election on one issue. This is an election. People live complex lives, and so we need to talk to voters as though they're not going to vote on one issue. They're going to vote about the totality of circumstances that really will impact our lives. And I think when you come down to it, to Scott's point about working class voters, when union folks hear how Donald Trump feels about right to work versus union protections, there needs to be some conversations with those members and say, like, he is not trying to protect your job. He is not fighting for you. He may say some of the things in the rally that make you feel warm and tingly inside, but when it comes down to it, you won't have a job or protecting your job because of that. I think Joe Biden can win those voters.
But yet you do see the Republican Party sort of changing, becoming a working class voter party, predominantly white working class individuals. But there's clearly some resonance with Donald Trump that they no longer see that resemblance within the Democratic Party or President Biden. You also have to look at the relative enthusiasm gap. Republicans, for the most part, are excited about voting for Donald Trump. Many Democratic voters are not excited about voting for Joe Biden. That's a very, very serious problem for the president, who in 2020 had the reality of people staying home. They voted by mail because of COVID. That's not a reality this time around.
You think those Nikki Haley voters are excited to vote for Donald Trump?
I bet 80% of them will vote for Donald Trump.
Are they excited about it?
They may not have to be excited. All they have to do is go vote for Trump.
You know, what's the over-under? Oh, sorry, March Madness, someplace else. I have a different March Madness bracket. I may add that one next time. Everyone stick around. Abby?
Laura, thank you, and stand by for another major projection. CNN can now officially project that Joe Biden will win the state of Washington. It adds to his delegate count in the Democratic primary fight that he just ended hours ago. 92% of the vote is in there, and the president will clear well ahead of the field there. And up next, one worry for Democrats. RFK Jr., and tonight, he says that he's considering Aaron Rodgers as a running mate. Are Democrats taking this candidacy seriously enough? We'll be back in a moment. And more on our breaking news. Donald Trump and President Biden both clinching their party's nominations tonight. It sets up a general election rematch starting, in March. And tonight, the Speaker of the House is trying to make Biden's age an issue.
Do you think the president is mentally fit?
Jesse, I've spent a little bit of time with him, and I'm sad to tell you that I don't think he is. I don't mean to be uncharitable here. Look, we respect the office, right? And people can't change how they age. Everybody ages differently. I'm just telling you that President Biden is not on his A game. Can I say it that way? In person, he's rather slow, and obviously his staff handles him very carefully.
I want to get back to my panel here on set. Well,
Abby,
okay.
can I start? Can I start?
Sure.
Listen, he is the first mainstream Republican leader to come out of a meeting with Joe Biden, really, and start to make this case. And it's amazing that he's starting to make this case. We pivot into the general election. I've been wondering when someone was going to do it. But it is also true that foreign leaders meet with the president and they say he's fine. I was in the White House. I've seen the president up close. I've watched him interact with my own boss, vice president. He has a give and take. And in America, saw it at the State of the Union. So I feel like this is a question that has been asked and has now been answered. The president will continue to go back out and show people week after week that he's up to doing the job.
Jamal, come on. I mean, listen, this isn't.
Give me an alternative fact.
People's eyes are not partisan here, and you have a good chunk of Democrats, half of them, concerned about his age and fitness. Voters. I don't mean Biden's inner circle and people that used to work for him. I mean voters who can see he's lost a step, and I don't understand the embarrassment over that. You can admit it. He's lost a step, but he's not crazy like the alternative.
I didn't say that he was Joe Biden, who was he was a 40-year-old Joe Biden.
No,
I said people watched him at the State of the Union, and they saw him able to have a conversation.
For an hour and a half. I'm telling you, listen, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden if this is the matchup. Absolutely. But I don't think it does any service to him or his candidacy to say, look, he proved it all wrong. This question's answered. Shut up about it anymore. We've got till November. I guarantee you he's going to have a moment, at least one or two.
The last thing, let's look at the president's schedule over the last few days and the president's schedule coming up. Look at Donald Trump's schedule. Donald Trump is not really campaigning as hard as Joe Biden. Exactly.
Well, I know.
So
That's why I'm not going to vote for him either. But I don't think you can make that comparison. Look, Joe Biden's doing the job of running for president. Congratulations. That's a pretty low bar. He wants to be president again.
Well, don't move the bar, though, because 2 weeks ago, people were saying, can Joe Biden even go out in America and campaign? Will we ever really see him? Can he hold a conversation? Is he like dribbling on himself?
That seems like a fair point.
I mean,
people were really raising the question whether Joe Biden was going to be in a basement for this entire presidential cycle, and he's
well,
not.
I mean, those are conspiracy theorists and Jesse Waters. I mean, real people are saying it looks like he's lost a step. He is not as agile as he used to be. He will be closer to 90 at the end of his second term than 80. And are we really about to nominate and elect two people that are this old and obviously losing steps? It's obvious.
Just two quick things. One is for the Speaker of the House to go out and say something like that when he has to negotiate with the president over the next couple of months over, spending bills. And I know they don't always get them done.
When he has negotiated with the president as well. He's already been at the White House to talk to him
Exactly.
about this
So, I mean, I don't know if, look, I'm not surprised that he said it. You would have expected to hear that in August when there's no more negotiating to do, you know, across the board. I do find this interesting, though, because this has become, the big topic of age. And I do find it interesting that we do have these two very older men, older because I am probably closer to them in age than I am some of you folks, right? but regardless of that are making decisions for my 18 and 19-year-old. It is amazing. I mean, they are, if you look at actuary tables, neither are going to be around very much longer, and it is amazing that they are making decisions based upon their worldview when the worldview of 20-year-olds right now is not the same as the worldview of an 80-year-old Joe Biden or Donald Trump.
A really important ideological point for sure.
I think the idea that you're going to be able to change public opinion about Biden's age, I mean, I know what you're saying. I know what you got to do. It's like pushing a boulder. You're pushing a boulder up a hill, and at any given time, the boulder could get away from you and roll all the way back down to the bottom. I mean, when you've got polling that's showing 86% of Americans think he can't get through another term or he's not up to it, and as he pointed out, lots of Democrats, it strikes me you'll never drag that number closer to something that's manageable. So the only thing you can do with it is what the campaign actually already tried to do. They put out this ad where he kind of leaned into a little bit. I mean, I don't think they're ever going to be able to fix it, but I don't know what other choice strategically they have except to say, okay, fine, I'm old, but it's okay for these reasons.
And the other choice that they have, which they are also doing, is pointing out correctly that Donald Trump is also 77 years old. And, I mean, you can call them gaffes, you can say he's lost a step. He makes all kinds of wild mistakes every single day.
Yes, and people do point that out, and they should point it out. Donald Trump's issues are far more nefarious to me than Joe Biden's age. I'm worried about Joe Biden's age.
And I think that is the strategy, is to say exactly that. They're more nefarious.
It's the only choice. It's your only option because they're men of a similar age. You can't say, well, he's slightly older, I'm slightly young. That doesn't work either. They're men of a certain age, and I think you have to draw the contrast and the stakes. And the stakes are, yes, I'm old, but this guy's crazy, absolutely crazy, and telling you to your face that he's crazy and he wants to become a dictator on the first day of office. But that should be the strategy.
The age debate, though, is about something, in my opinion, different than just the numeric age. It really is a question of strength versus weakness. And I think that's how that's what I see in the polling. People are perceiving it. One of these guys is strong enough to solve a problem, whatever a major problem is, and one of them looks like they're so weak that they've let problems get away from them, and I don't think he would ever be strong enough to reel them back in. So, when you think about narratives about campaigns and about candidates and, just the average voter, one looks strong. I know he's older, but he looks strong and vigorous, and Biden does not. And I don't know if he'll ever be able to change that dynamic.
Well,
the one way you start to get at it,
man than
the one way you start to get at it is strong in pursuit of what, right? And there's a real question on the table about in pursuit of what. And what we do know is Donald Trump put the Supreme Court in place that got rid of Roe v. Wade, right? And American women have decided they are not happy, and the men who love them, they are not happy about the fact that we have lost the right to abortion. We have Republicans who are now in Republican courts that are going after IVF. You have people who aren't willing to support contraception in the United States Congress, right? So all these questions about how, the Republicans who are interfering in our bedrooms, instead of thinking about how it is we're going to help protect America around the world, I think this is the problem for the Republican Party.
But to that exact point, Donald Trump has changed his opinion on abortion and IVF several times. No one looks at Donald Trump and thinks that's a policy leader, right?
We'll leave it there, guys. Everyone, stick around for us, Laura.
That made me laugh. Thank you so much. Next, Donald Trump is responding to clinching the Republican nomination. Plus, RFK Jr. is floating, you won't believe it, Aaron Rodgers and Jesse Ventura as a potential running mate, as Democrats fear Kennedy is playing the spoiler in this election. This is a special edition of Laura Coates Live. All right, here we go. Tonight, the general election gets underway in earnest. In both Joe Biden and Donald Trump clinching their party's nominations, assuring now a 2020 rematch. Kristen Holmes is monitoring the former president's campaign for us on this very important night. Kristen, we heard from Trump just moments ago. What did he say?
Well, Laura, he responded with about as much enthusiasm and excitement as you would expect from someone who's already acting like the presumptive nominee for several weeks now. In a pre-recorded video that he clearly recorded during the day today, he essentially just thanked supporters, saying it was time to move on to the general election. It's really quite striking when you think about where we are right now. It is March. Donald Trump is not an incumbent president, and yet he has secured the nomination so early in the process with so many delegate votes, but yet no party, no speech, no event even, just this pre-recorded video. Take a listen to part of what he said.
It's your favorite president speaking to you on a really great day of victory. The Republican National Committee has just declared us the official nominee, and so we're the official nominee of the Republican Party, which is a big deal.
And as I've said, they have already started working towards the general election. A big part of this is trying to build out their strategy, trying to build out their ground game in those critical battleground states. One thing that Donald Trump and his team know is that it is not going to be an easy fight to November. We talk about these missing voter groups that Donald Trump is struggling with when we see these primary numbers, when John breaks it down on the wall. They are going to try to offset that, and they're coming up with their strategies now on how to do that. The other part of this has been their absolute takeover of the Republican National Committee, which we have seen in the last week. They have been firing staffers left and right, replacing them with Trump loyalists, and they plan on continuing to do so as they head into November and try to build out, again, this critical infrastructure so that they can get the ground they need, or they believe that they need, to get and recontrol the White House in November.
Kristen Holmes, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Look, your November choice is Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, but could there be more? I mean, don't discount the impact of a potential third-party candidate who's got the most famous last name in America, especially in politics. I'm talking about independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr., telling CNN tonight he has selected a running mate and will announce his decision within 2 weeks. Kennedy says he chose from a short list, including New York Jets quarterback and fellow vaccine skeptic Aaron Rodgers. The Jets may have a little something to say about that because he is supposed to start for them in the fall after recovering from the Achilles heel injury. Also on his short list, the former pro wrestler and one-time Minnesota governor, Jesse "the Body" Ventura. With Kennedy's campaign going ahead with the VP pick and working to get on general election ballots across multiple states, are Democrats taking his candidacy seriously enough? I'm back with my panel. Eva, let me start with you because you have been on the campaign trail with him. You've recently spoken to RFK Jr. What do you think? Is he not being taken seriously as a third-party contender?
Yeah, I just got off the phone with him about 2 hours ago. He wouldn't say who he ultimately selected.
Did he lean in, though? Did he have a Minnesota accent? Did he have a jersey on? What's going on?
No. He's just trying to create some buzz and excitement, I think, around this this announcement. Listen, I think Democrats are taking this seriously. They are investing here outside of his events. You see the DNC mobile billboards tying Kennedy to Trump. You know, I don't know what impact this will have because he draws such a diverse pool of voters, both people that I think you could characterize as on the right and the left. You know, a lot of his message centers on anti-war. He says Democrats and Republicans are equally addicted to the war machine. You get a lot of people that really resonates with. I would also say his environmentalism background. You know, for a long time, he was this environmental advocate. You have those voters as well. And so I think Biden and Trump both have reasons for concern because there is some interest in Kennedy. And of course, the family name helps as well.
So most people think about him, obviously, in terms of the anti-vaxxing stance that he has. Aaron Rodgers, by the way, famously has a similar background recently on these points. But to Eva's point, you're thinking about who is most concerned with a so-called spoiler or third-party candidate. When you look at it, Sir Michael, is he then likely to pull from maybe both Biden and Kennedy?
I mean, maybe,
and Trump,
maybe a few from Trump, but I would argue more from Biden. And if you're the Biden campaign, you got to be worried. If you're Trump, you're probably pretty happy. I mean, you're looking at him getting on the ballot in Georgia, a state that the former president lost by give or take 12,000 votes. Nevada, you're talking about maybe 10 to 11,000 votes. I mean, you're talking very, very slim margins. Wisconsin, 20,000. Michigan, we know the math there. And so if you're Trump, you're looking for any disruptor to potentially pull votes away from Joe Biden because you're pretty confident that you're going to be able to maximize your turnout, similarly to what you did in 2020. I would also add Jill Stein is another individual that we should be worried about. Now, I know we don't talk a lot about Cornel West, but let's say he gets on the ballot in one or two of these states, then again, you have another individual likely pulling voters away from the Democrat versus the Republican.
Are you concerned when you think about, I mean, the short list of people who are in the VP, by the way, I mean, Jesse Ventura, I'm from Minnesota. He was not taken seriously until he was. And he was the governor of Minnesota. Aaron Rodgers, obviously a different career entirely. But, I mean, I think we've learned in American politics, looking down our noses ends up cutting our own noses off to spite our face.
Yeah, and you didn't mention, but also the no labels effort. They could also be running. I think this can cut both ways, to Eva's point. But my question for all of these third-party candidates, but particularly for RFK, is what are you doing, and are you actually trying to win the presidency? Because in order to win, you have to get to 270. And if you're just in battleground states, let's say you want to say 8 to 10 battleground states, that's only about 125, 130 electoral college votes. So you're actually not trying to be the president. You are trying to be a disruptor. And I think you need to, look, I am all for if you want to run for president and represent the people, but run a real race. Get on the ballot in every state. Set up an actual party that's not, you know, just 6 weeks out from the election or a year out from the election and try and mobilize folks. Really engage with folks and voters. But that's not what these third-party candidates are doing. And I think that is the thing that really scares me, is they are showing up as disruptors. And in past elections, Hillary Clinton specifically in 2016, that's right, they were detrimental to the Democrats.
And showing up as disruptors in a public that is hungry for disruption. And to Laura's point about Jesse Ventura not being taken seriously, one of my favorite stats is from the Pew Research Center last fall, and it's 25% of Democratic voters believe that government will always do the right thing. 8% of Republican voters believe that trust government to do the right thing. There's a crisis of faith in government right now, and for a country that has already elected a reality television host as a president, the idea of an anti-vax football star or a former governor pro wrestler is actually quite attractive to many people who are disillusioned with how our government works. And so, yes, it cuts all these different ways, and even if these aren't serious races, these are really tapping into something that a part of the public.
To be fair, I just named a couple of people. Look at this. Look at the screen, everyone. If you bring that back up for everyone to see, I mean, the short list does include others. Obviously, Tulsi Gabbard, Senator Rand Paul, Andrew Yang. You know the most about his campaign, Eva. Tell me about why is he think of being called a disruptor?
Well, I think he probably very much enjoys that because he would argue that our politics needs some disruption. I will say, though, on the vaccine issue, the voters that are showing up to his events, they don't raise that as their number one issue. Actually, I went to some of his Black-focused voter outreach events recently in New York, and a lot of voters showed up with concerns about immigration, about resources. And I think this is a real challenge for Democrats. What we see are marginalized groups as the immigration conversation becomes front and center, being pitted against one another. And Democrats aren't doing enough to really talk about this issue, I think, in a humane way. Some of the rhetoric sometimes mirrors Republicans. And then you have these Black voters showing up to his events raising those concerns about immigration. So that is something, I think, a space to really watch. Yes, I think the dominant narrative about Kennedy is that he's anti-vax, but we shouldn't get so caught up in that issue, that we don't pay attention to all the other reasons why voters across the country might be attracted to his campaign.
I'm curious to see what black men will do. We know that the Trump campaign is going to target black men. They're hoping to maybe pull a percentage or two. That may not sound substantial to most of the viewers, but mathematically that will potentially make a difference. But if there are black male voters who are saying, you know, we like some of Trump's rhetoric on immigration, but we don't like his position on various racial issues, here comes RFK, who is certainly someone who's spoken about race. He's been outspoken about his family's history with race. That is certainly a more comfortable candidate, I would argue, for a male of color to say, hey, I don't want Biden. I certainly can't vote for Trump because he's on the wrong side on these particular issues. So here's RFK. I'll give him my vote.
Has he come out with gold sneakers yet, though?
Oh, God.
That's the question.
I
hope not, Elliot.
I think that the Biden campaign is going to have to run against both of these individuals if he actually gets on the ballot. I think that would be smart. I think they should talk to voters about why RFK is not a safe or good choice, not in the same way as Donald Trump, but they should not take it for granted. I don't think they are, but it is an important thing because we know the margins are going to be so slim in this election.
Yeah.
Really great point. Everyone, thank you so much for your insight tonight. Abby, the general election is now set. What are you going to be watching for going forward in the coming weeks ahead besides your bedtime?
Yeah, definitely that. But I mean, look, Laura, tonight the voters have spoken, and they've spoken in a resounding fashion. I mean, when you look at that map that John King was showing us earlier tonight, it's pretty much all blue for Joe Biden and almost all red for Donald Trump. If there was any resistance to these two candidates, certainly was not strong enough to stop them.
I mean, I'm going to be looking at what's happening, especially in places like Georgia with that 11,800 or so votes. And of course, a place where we're waiting to see if Fani Willis will be disqualified or not for an election subversion case and RICO charges. I mean, these legal issues may have been thrust as a potential third-party candidate in all of this as well. I mean, you got the couch, you got third-party candidates, you got the legal matters, and you got these two who are set. It's really going to be a fascinating run till November.
I would advise no one to place their bets right now. There's a long way between now and November. Lots for us to watch for, Laura.
Yeah, there is. Everyone, she said it. Hold your bets. Thank you for watching a special edition of Laura Coates Live. Donald Trump and Joe Biden are your nominees.
And CNN's continuing coverage of the pivot to the general election continues next.